said, we've worked on this for a couple of years. We've done a lot of joint work together. A few years ago, about 3 years ago, I had some major building work done to our home. And I said to my family, I said, do you know what? You know I like technology. You know I love gadgets and things. I'm going to try to install every smart home device that I can in our home that I believe meets two criteria. One is it mustn't take data out of our home. Second criteria, I must feel I can secure it. There must be enough documentation there to enable us to secure it. And after great research and painstaking research, we installed zero technology. Yeah. And that is still the state of affairs right now, because every smart home technology you look at, they all want to steal data from your home and take it out of your home. Well, if they can't secure their own environment, why should I let them take my data out of my home and secure it there? Yeah, so many vendors, you hear about so many breaches. So in terms of what I'm going to be covering today, it's as a result of our concern about this sort of thing, but on a far larger scale, which is smart buildings and smart cities. So the reference to large-scale IoT projects really is about smart buildings and smart homes. We had earlier this year, we wrote a paper, and that's what I'm going to be talking about. It was sponsored by a CCTV company. So most of the examples that I give here are related to CCTV, but they apply to any sort of smart building, smart city type environment. So we're talking about heating, lighting, air conditioning, burglar alarm, fire alarm, access control. About 14 years ago, I did some research work, and how I accidentally ended up doing this sort of work was I researched into the vulnerabilities of network CCTV systems. And I was amazed that at that time we didn't use the word IoT. I was amazed at how many vulnerabilities there were at every single layer that you looked at. It wasn't like there was one vulnerability here and another one there. We're talking loads every single layer, and I just couldn't believe it. And I started to talk to vendors, and at that time nobody was interested in speaking to me. Nobody was interested, and only once did I come across a vendor when I said to them, what security do you have? And the response was, we have 3 layers of security. And I said, oh, great, what are those 3 layers of security? And the answer was, well, we have ordinary user password, we have admin password, and super admin password. They are 3 levels of security. Yeah, I didn't understand there were 3 levels of security in those days. 3 levels, great. So that's the sort of response that I had at that time. James and I started to work together about 10 years ago. So this paper, let me just zoom through it if I can. Right, first of all, smart things. I won't go into great detail. We all know what smart things are. This is a presentation I've given a few times covering this topic. So I go through all this stuff that you're all familiar with anyway. But some of the challenges. So challenges around these are the fact that the device or the system defined functionality cannot alter until it's too late. So there's so many things about a device that are just fixed, and they are fixed forever, and nothing will change. So once you've bought it and your investment is in that product, it's too late now to do anything about it. Additional devices and systems are introduced, and they introduce new vulnerabilities into the whole thing themselves when we're talking about smart buildings and so on. Every additional stakeholder, when you're talking again about large-scale IoT projects, they're able to alter the configuration. So what we were finding was, and the work we're doing, and we're noticing that sometimes you might have a CCTV supplier. They pass it on to an integrator or a consultant. They pass it down. So all this going along the line until it's actually installed and it works, what you find is somebody's introduced different vulnerabilities because of the way that they configure things with the way they might have been at some point or another. And that was quite frustrating, and we thought that's a challenge. How do you deal with this? Additional stakeholders not able to verify necessarily the data protection or security of the previous stakeholders. So in the supply chain, the whole of the supply chain, you're not able to verify anything. Vendors don't control the maturity of data protection or the security capabilities of the supply chain. So whatever the vendor might do, what happens afterwards is uncontrollable. It's similar to something I said before, but they're not able to do anything about it. Specifiers don't know how to specify, and that's one of the things that we're trying to deal with. As James and I think some of you may have been in a session earlier on, we are the vice chairs of the Smart Buildings Group, and that's, again, one of the things that we're looking at. Data protection was fine. So if we had data protection, what was wrong with it? Why did we have to have GDPR? Amongst anything else, most of you, if you're in Europe, you will know that many organisations, I can say of all the data protection work I've done in the UK, before GDPR came along in May, I would say a higher percentage of companies and organisations did not comply with data protection than the number that did. So we're talking more than 50% here that although data protection had been around since in the UK, the Data Protection Act was 1998, so over 20 years, people were not complying with it. Why weren't they complying with it? Many, many reasons. Amongst those, there was no incentive. Now that we've got big fines, there's a greater incentive. So data protection was fine. Why have we got it? Partly it's because of the growth of the internet. There's been lots and lots of changes. We didn't anticipate. The Data Protection Act, although in the UK was passed in 1998, as I said, the directive was 94, was it? Somebody correct me, somewhere around about there. It was 94, yeah. Yeah, but it was drafted before then. So they'd been arguing about it over a period of years. And that was way before the internet was around. So it was way before sensors and surveillance devices became so pervasive. The increased volumes of databases from every device possible. Do you know you cannot get a non-smart TV anymore? Yep. If you want a TV, you have to get a smart one. It's the same with a lot of devices. The way they are going, they are beginning to collect data and databases of lots of information from us. Regulations protect the new oil from, and basically these guys who are trying to protect their oil are ignoring and frustrating the regulators in big time. The impact of the growth of social media, IoT facilitation of data collection, and there has been a lot of that already. The directive, as it was previously, allowed every member state to enact almost what it wanted within reason, but what we got was a mishmash of so many different things, of 27 states trying to do something which they thought was right. And in some places, because of the history of Europe and its background, and our own association with identity cards, and all of those things in the 27 states, it's been quite mixed, and that's partly what led to the problem. So, interesting times, interesting changes. Yes, there have been lots and lots of changes, but the two key changes in GDPR I'm going to focus on in terms of relevance to IoT. Basically, the first bit is in terms of what it says there and where it relates to the supply chain in some respects. Effectively, let me just point out, this is from the text. The controller should adopt internal policies and implement measures which meet in particular the principles of data protection by design and data protection by default. Yep. Enabling the controller to create and improve features. That's improve over a period of time. That doesn't mean once you've got the product out, you leave them the same. Yep. Producers of the product, the manufacturers are included, services, applications to take into account the rights of data protection, et cetera, et cetera. So, producers are not left out. At one time, people were saying, well, we don't have to worry about these things. So when I was speaking to device manufacturers 14 years ago, they were saying, well, we don't have to worry about it. It's nothing to do with us because data protection, it's a data controller that worries about this, not us. But now manufacturers have to get involved. The actual text is this, and I've underlined it if anyone's interested. You will get a copy of the slides later on when they're available, but there is a recital as well. Okay, so the other part of the where it gets interesting about GDPR and data protection is the fact that we had an Article 29 working party opinion, and that was in a paper called WP223. If you are interested, do follow it up. It's a very interesting paper. It says recent developments. It's called Recent Developments in Internet of Things, which effectively makes it easy to understand how to deal with some of the data collection in an IoT device. And the paragraph 2 states, and this is really interesting, this opinion thus does not deal specifically with B2B applications, the more global issues like smart cities, smart transportation, as well as M2M, that's machine-to-machine developments, yet the principles and recommendations in this opinion may apply outside its strict scope and cover these other developments in IoT. So what the paper was trying to say was that it didn't want to make the same mistake that the directive made in the first directive, because they didn't know how the internet was going to play out. So what they're saying is we're going to wait until IoT, machine to machine, and all those things play out before we issue advice. Yep. So they're trying to make sure that they are covered, that principles in here will apply right across the board right now, but there's many things that they're going to provide greater guidance on. So that's the basics in terms of what the white paper we worked on. And we focused on producers and products and services and applications, and we tried to follow what it says in the guidance. So I won't go into this because I know I haven't got much time. I've probably got more slides than I've got time for, but we are focused on privacy by design and default and those sorts of principles. And the scope, when we put the white paper together, what we were trying to do was we weren't trying to look at how to implement GDPR, because there's plenty of good advice on that, lots of really good sources. We weren't trying to provide guidance on data protection impact assessments, because again, there's lots of good sources. We weren't trying to be country specific in terms of CCTV surveillance and so on, because they are very, very specific to each country's laws. We weren't trying to provide general data protection or data processor advice, but what we wanted was a complete list of control mechanisms. When I say complete from other sources. So we pinched and we stole and we try and put together as much as possible, and I'll come back to that in a minute. So what was in scope in that respect was provide a set of control mechanisms which may be relevant for non-processor stakeholders of large-scale IoT projects to help those processing the data. To provide data protection and security control mechanisms as seen as a major factor in creating. So we tried to make sure what we were doing was we took from every source we could come up with, bunched them all together, analysed them and grouped them up so that it was easier. We didn't want to reinvent the wheel. There are plenty of really good, as our first speaker covered, really good standards. We don't have to invent new standards for everything just because there's a slight change, and we didn't want to do that either. So what we finalised with was something we're going to come on to a bit, but what we wanted to include was we wanted to include things, and when we looked at the white paper and the controls, do they cover big data analytics as a technology? Does it cover cloud computing, artificial intelligence, machine learning, as far as we can and we know at the moment? Would it cover sensors, biometrics, communication technology, and so on? So we tried to make sure we looked at all the different types of technologies as well as the different types of products. So whether it be payment devices, medical devices, physical security systems, homes, whatever it was, we wanted to make sure the products themselves were covered. We didn't want to just look at technologies or products. We also decided we wanted to cover within that services, so installation services, because as I said, along the supply chain in large-scale IoT, each stakeholder has a stake, but the supply chain consists of lots and lots of different people who add one bit or another bit to the whole chain. And we covered lots of scenarios. I've been told I've got 5 minutes, so I'm going to whiz through some of these to get to what I think you may be interested in. So we looked at device technology. So we tried to include storage, hardware, software, and the overlapping bits, and put them together for what we called pre-production stakeholders. So we looked at everything a supplier needs to do before the product goes out the door. So these are some of the pre-production stakeholders. So those are the library providers, those are the operating system providers, they're the protocol standards, whatever, anything that goes in before the product gets out the door. And we put, I know this looks a bit complex, but you will get the slides and you'll be able to see this. But the idea was that we would include absolutely anything and everything depending on how you manufacture the product, whether you do everything yourself or you are just someone who puts different components together. And that's the diagram you saw earlier on. And these are different systems connecting in and what you're trying to do in terms of the rights and the principles. So we tried to put that together for pre-production, but we thought, it's not just pre-production, it's the post-production. And the post-production is very important because that's when things can go wrong. The manufacturer can control what happens pre-production, but what's harder to control is once the device goes out. So you've got system upon system upon system, now they're integrating. Whereas some of the conversations we heard today, we're talking about device to device. We're not talking necessarily device to device. We're talking complete systems to complete systems. And that's slightly different. And what we covered then was we started looking at a whole bunch of things. And what I would say, because I'm going to run out of time, 3 things to bear in mind in these sorts of scenarios is that understand the device life cycle, which may be from here to about here before the destruction. That is the shortest life cycle. The code, the library, the APIs will exist long before the device, and quite often they'll exist long after the device. Yep. The data life cycle will start with the device, but it will also live long after the device has ended. And that is quite important to understand because you need to deal with the data differently than you're dealing with the product life cycle. Now, bearing in mind the product life cycle, CCTV cameras as an example, if manufacturers give a lifespan of 15 years, although the lifespan may be 15 years, they will be in use for 25 years at least. So you need to make sure that whatever goes in them, you must be able to update them. And when you're able to update them and keep them secure, you must be able to deal with all the other data that relates to them. So coming very quickly towards an end, the control mechanisms, what we put together from all the different sources, 254 controls. We put together organizational controls, which included policy and awareness, data protection controls, incident controls, system controls. There's lots and lots of different controls. Examples of controls here, and I'm going to rush through this, and I want to leave time for questions. Thank you. But you can download the white paper at this place here, by the way. Thank you very much.